Welcome to Breakpoint this week. I'm Shane Morris, here with John Stonestreet, talking about the stories of the week from a Christian worldview perspective. You can find links to all of the stories that we're mentioning today on the program by visiting breakpoint.org, where you're also going to find commentaries and resources every day to help you live and think like a Christian in today's culture. Well, John Stonestreet, happy almost Christmas here. I don't know if you Anglicans are allowed to say that right now. Is that like a faux pas in liturgical circles to say that at this point? We're only a few days away. Surely I can say Merry Christmas, Happy Christmas.
Well, it is still Advent officially, just for the record, just for the Anglican record. But speaking of Anglican and British, did you just say Happy Christmas instead of British Christmas? That's the British way to say Merry Christmas.
No. Hold
on. I feel like this is coming from either A, you read too much Narnia, or secretly deep down you really do like that John Lennon, Yoko Ono song. So this is Christmas, or where they say Happy Christmas like 3 times in the middle of it, which officially was the worst Christmas song in history until Train.
We've debated that in past episodes, but I think maybe it's the influence.
I think we actually agreed on that, though, didn't we? Did
Yes,
we actually agree like it was the most ridiculous song until Train?
I think so. When you finally read the lyrics, you convinced me that the Train song was the worst of all. But no, I think it maybe the influence of Peppa Pig in my life or something like that. I'm a dad of young kids, so that sort of stuff sort of enters into your life. Did you hear about the kids who were adopting British accents because of
Peppa Pig?
Overexposure to Peppa Pig? So maybe that's where Happy Christmas comes from.
Well, there was a moment in our family, I think my oldest was probably 6, and we were like 6'4", all girls, and we listened in, and they were definitely playing in a British accent. And it had nothing to do with Peppa Pig. It had everything to do with the Focus on the Family radio drama of Narnia.
That's a much better reason.
Those things, man, those things are magic. They got us through so many road trips. I remember doing a 5-hour trip to go teach somewhere, and I had a 5-year-old and 3-year-old in the car, and we did not stop to use the bathroom once. Not once. With a 5-year-old and 3-year-old girl, we did not stop once. They listened straight on through. I think we pulled a 4-hour stint because of those things. So I've been a fan ever since, but I did walk by their room and heard them all, playing in British accents.
That was my introduction to David Suchet too, and he plays Aslan in that series. And man, to this date, I think he's the best Aslan. Apologies to Liam Neeson, who played it in the 2005 version. Well, we're coming up on
in the in the movie version.
Yeah, in the movie version.
Oh, don't get me started. That was pathetic.
Well, we're gonna move away from John's hobby horses here and move on to when we mentioned Christmas, and whether you're Anglican, liturgical or not, whether you're allowed to say Happy Christmas, Merry Christmas, it's coming in a few days, and that means family gatherings are coming. And there's a commentary this week, John, where you talked about dealing with these family gatherings with friends in light of this incredibly contentious political season and all that's happened over the course of the year and all that we've disagreed on passionately, and just not letting it become a repeat of the nightmare scenarios that a lot of people saw unfold at Thanksgiving. So tell us about that commentary, what the point of that was, because I thought it was just a fantastic call to to overlook these sorts of political disagreements and get back to the heart of what Christmas is about and why we're gathering.
Well, at some point we have to move on. At some point we have to decide, okay, we're going to continue this nation together because the election is finally decided. Now some are, some probably won't, and we'll probably get another round of emails like I did this week, saying it's not over. There's still a steal or whatever. I think by and large that is all of those cards now are off the table. Unless the very idea that there's no way the president could have lost this thing is worth, kind of giving away the things that the ways we've have proceeded as a nation since the very beginning. So that's kind of where we're at. But even more than that, the commentary was about, look, I started it this way, and it was basically a prediction of the 2020 election, which is awful late to do it. But I felt better thinking I can't be as bad as the polls in whatever prediction that I make, which is just this: people are gonna regret 3, 5, 10 years. We're gonna look back at things that we said, and we're gonna regret it. Things that we said to other people, ways that we treated other people on both sides of issues. And I'm not saying that there are two sides to every issue. I think there are plenty of issues that there aren't two sides to, in terms of right and wrong. There's just one. Certainly, we are made our positions very clear when it comes to life, when it comes to marriage, when it comes to religious liberty, and so on. And yet, even people who agree with us on all of those issues, and yet maybe didn't fight long enough to stop the steal, or maybe didn't agree with us that there was a steal, or whatever. The language that has been used, the separation that has happened, and as I said, it's kind of a stunning reality. I think a lot of families know what I'm talking about. And I don't think it's just, by the way, the election. I think it is. It is all the other things that were politicized. I mean, the virus was politicized. The vaccine is politicized.
Yeah, so in other words, everything that happened this year, because everything was politicized.
That's right. And the fact that we decided to politicize everything says a lot about the nation. I've said this in a number of ways. I'm trying to figure out more ways to kind of explain it, because I think it's a very, very important point. When the things that make a culture strong are thinned out and weakened, then politics fills that vacuum. When the things that allow us to live with our disagreements and go forward, when those things become weak, when our bonds become, our pre-political bonds become fragmented and fractured, or become thinned out and frayed, then political loyalties take the cake, and we're really there as a nation. Now, look. Again, I'm not saying that these issues, what's at stake here, isn't huge. I'm not saying at all that these issues don't matter. Please hear me correctly on this. There is a lot at stake at our culture. We don't agree on what the good life is and disagree on how to get there. We disagree on what the good life is. But when everything becomes political, then all the stakes of every issue becomes life and death issues, or becomes, the things that we're ready to sacrifice all of our loyalties and allegiances for. And I think this is especially true with family, and I think it's especially true with church. We talked about the non-essential church for months now, Shane. This is when the impact of the non-essential church is felt most acutely. When we don't have our deeply held pre-political loyalties. And so then our loyalties become other things. This is, nations can't last very long when everything becomes politicized like this. When every issue is worth fighting and dying over. When we have our highest and steepest allegiances and loyalties to things that aren't immediately in our everyday lives, like our families, our spouses, our children, our parents, and our church family. That's what we're seeing. It's a fraying at the seam. We don't have a center. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. We don't have a center.
Don't miss the deep analysis of this sort of thing. I had Carl Trueman on the Upstream podcast a while back, and a couple of friends of mine with the Davenant Institute just had him on another podcast. It's called Pilgrim Faith, and they talked about his recent book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And one of the key points that he makes in that book is that our pre-political organic connections as human beings are fraying, and our sort of circles of trust and identity are becoming more and more distant, due in part to technology and the way we can talk to people who we never would have met prior to this. And it's actually setting us at war with each other in our more natural, organic, human circles of association and trust, because we're forming our identities out here based on stuff we read about politics on the internet. And these are our people. These are the ones we trust. These are the ones whose word we take as gospel. And then we come back to our families, the people with whom we share blood and place and home, our churches, the people with whom we worship, the real human beings, as Lewis said, who we snub and greet and interact with every day. These are the ones that end up getting the brunt of our relocation of identity. And to be a conservative, according to Truman, in a great important sense, means to hold your identity close. It means to remember who you are as a human with the people who are really around you, not the people who you meet in far off distant places on the internet, and form your identity or ideology is perhaps a better word around those things. Don't let yourself be pulled into this expressive individualism, as he calls it. Remind yourself what's real and what most affects your life, and then ask yourself questions like, as you did in the commentary, 10 years from now, how much is it going to matter what happened in this election? Not in terms of broad policy issues or the direction of our culture in general, but to me, to my own family, to my own circle of influence, to my duties, to my fellow human beings. What's going to be different? How much is different on that front between 2008 to 2016, and from 2016 to now? How much really changed depending on who was in the White House? We got to ask questions like that before we make our core allegiance wrapped around who's president or who won an election or what we think about who won the election. These are just be a human being. That's a big part of being a Christian.
That last point, Shane, about how much is it going to matter because of who's in the White House. A lot has changed from 2008 to 2016. Things I often say this. I think I say this in the book. Things that were unthinkable then are unquestionable now. Right?
Which book is this?
Practical Guide to Culture.
Okay.
Things that were unthinkable have become unquestionable, and it seems like it happened overnight. But you know what? Didn't happen because of who was in the White House. Mm-hmm. Honestly, obviously, the policies of the Obama administration certainly did a lot to drive a lot of things home in terms of the LGBT movement. But it was really what happened in the business space. What happens in the business space, in particular, that segment of culture, that sector of culture in 2014, when it really turned and became woke, when capitalism became woke capitalism, that's what impacted more of our lives. That's a pre-political reality. When churches give up on the gospel, that's a pre-political reality. When families fragment apart. So we're not saying that these issues don't happen, and we're not saying that these issues don't matter. We're saying that fundamentally that, and that who's in the White House doesn't matter. We're just saying that there's a lot of our lives that we have put up for stake. And you use that phrase, expressive individualism, which of course we've talked a lot over the years about the isolation of the self. Robert Putnam's idea of bowling alone, how we've become a more and more individualistic society. I think what we saw in 2020 is that people that were alone started to feel cornered. And when people are cornered alone, then anger's the only option left. Reaching out. And I think some of that has to do with certainly, COVID-related policies. Some of that has to do with how churches handled isolation, how people handle isolation. But the habits that are already in our lives pre-COVID were just made worse. They were just escalated on us. And for many of us, that feeling of being alone and isolated is something that has taken us, I think, the wrong direction. We're going to have to rebuild these pre-political realities. That's the answer, even for those of us that think that there are some dramatic things wrong with our nation that needs to be rebuilt. Mm-hmm. The answer is not going to come through even elections. Elections reflect what's happening in culture far more than they create what's happening in culture. And I think that's still the case. I really do. Anyway, that was the gist of that commentary. And then it's just really simple. This idea of encouraging one another to love and good works, exhorting one another to love and good works, to leave your sacrifice and go be reconciled with your brother. These aren't suggestions from Jesus. These are commands from Jesus. And there were plenty of people, and I guess at one level I really appreciate their honesty, where they said, nope, not going to do it. Plenty of people commented, nope, not going to do it, not going to be reconciled. Anybody that's on the wrong side of this one is on the wrong side of me. And the interesting thing was equating people who inadequately saw this particular election for those that are on the wrong side of almost everything.
It's become a litmus test of darkness and light, of good and evil.
It really, yeah, that has, and some of that's the language coming out of it, creating that language coming out of some of the leadership, creating that sort of dichotomy. I appreciate that honesty. I'm just not going to do it, but I just have to remind, if you follow Jesus, it's not an option. This command wasn't like, hey, if you feel like it, repent. It was like, repent, be reconciled to your brother, be reconciled to your sister. It's time to start doing that.
And if you think you can't live as a good citizen or possibly, participate civilly in a system where many people differ from you on deep and crucial issues, and we do believe they're deep and crucial issues, then I would say you have the apostles to answer to. You have the New Testament to answer to, because they were in a culture where everyone disagreed with them on deep and crucial issues. The Greco-Roman world was not a nice place. It was not a Christian place. And yet we have all these commands to love our neighbors as ourselves, to submit to the governing authorities, to be the best citizens we possibly can in the time and place in which we've been put by God. So, I think that's exactly right, John. And to cool off the temperature, as we've been talking about repeatedly on the program, we're going to need to remember those pre-political realities, especially at this time of year. Well, we're going to take a quick break, folks. We'll be right back after this to talk about more of the stories of the week from a Christian worldview perspective. Stay with us. We're back on Breakpoint this week, talking about the stories of the week from a Christian worldview perspective. John, there was a story that caught my attention on Thursday afternoon, and it was a report from Pew Research, and they found that it was a surprising report. I had never seen anything like this before, that government restrictions on religion worldwide had reached their highest level in over a decade, which is since records have been taken, as of 2018. So that's the latest data we have. The breakdown is that laws, policies, and actions by officials around the world that impinge on religious beliefs and practices continue to climb. They reached an all-time high between 2007 and 2018, which is the latest stuff we've got available right now. And the presumption is that it's continued to worsen since then. Let's talk about this, because we have talked about the World Watch List. We've talked about the rising tide of persecution and restriction, not just on Christians, but on religious minorities worldwide, and how this is an issue of primary concern for Christians in this country, what it means to us, why this is a big deal, what's behind it, and what we can do. So, the first observation that I often hear, John, is that this is not it's not coming from the kinds of government policies that we often worry about, or even the kinds of governments we often worry about, because here in the Western world, in the United States, in Western Europe, we're concerned, rightly, I think, about policies that suppress the free exercise of Christianity in all kinds of spheres, and whether it's baking wedding cakes or what we can say or the kind of speech that's allowed online on social media, stuff like that is our concern. But in other countries, the concerns are much weightier and much more severe. They have to do with whether you can work, whether you can participate in society, whether you can have freedom, or even go to church and worship. Sometimes they're a matter of life and death. And the types of governments we see perpetuating these policies predominantly fall into two camps, as far as I understand it: Islamic governments and communist or totalitarian leftist governments. So the paradigms for these would be, some of the Middle Eastern nations that have openly suppressed Christianity, and North Korea and China, and places where we're seeing rising tides of persecution against not just Christians, but now other religious minorities like the Muslim Uyghurs. So let's talk about this.
Yeah, it's a fascinating study, and it goes along with what we see, each year with the World Watch List from Open Doors, which is the worst year of Christian persecution is this year, and the second worst year was last year, and then the year before. It's the same sort of trend because almost all persecution, Christian religious persecution of religious minorities is coming from the government level. And it makes sense that as you see an uptick of that, you're also seeing kind of a clamp down. Of course, we also have some of these high profile things like China, once again, going back to kind of Mao Part 2, the same sort of way of looking at and approaching religion that they'd really softened up on, over the last decade or so. And kind of the loss of control, Mao being in a kind of vulnerable position, Xi Jinping being in a vulnerable position has led him to kind of readapt those kind of policies of Mao. And of course, it's important to note we're not just talking about treatment of Christians. We're talking about the treatment of other religious minorities. We have segments of India, for example, that have really clamped down on Islamic individuals. We certainly have seen that in China with the Uyghur population, where we're seeing the treatment of the Uyghurs in a way that the world hasn't seen a group treated since the way the Germans treated the Jews during the Holocaust. I mean, it's actually eerily similar how the Chinese are treating Muslim Uyghurs. And then, of course, we have places where there were kind of corners of freedom where that's being lost, like Hong Kong, for example. That's a net loss for the world. And certainly economically, it's going to be a net loss, but even more importantly, just for the way that this thing was flourishing. And Hong Kong was such a wonderful contrast to what we were seeing in mainland China in terms of what happens when people are treated as individuals that are made in the image of God, or at least treated in ways that are far more aligned with that than the way communists tend to treat citizens. So yeah, it's a big deal. I do want to say something, though, in regards to this thing that we kind of often do, in which we compare this with some of the things that Christians here in the United States are concerned about. For example, the ability to make our own decisions in running our businesses and not be forced to communicate messages, through our artistic gifts or through our talents that we don't agree with. I'm thinking, obviously, of Barronelle Stutzman and Jack Phillips, and I'm thinking, as well of just other ways in which churches have, or people of faith have faced restrictions. That's the corporate space. We could also talk about how churches were singled out in ways during COVID. We certainly have seen that in New York. We've seen that in Nevada. We've seen that in California. We've seen threats. And by the way, not just churches. I mean, good heavens, what Andrew Cuomo has done to the Orthodox Jewish population is unbelievable in New York. What's interesting of people of faith, or let me say that again, is that the courts seem to continue to come down on the side of people of faith. That's what we saw, for example, last week with the Ninth Circuit, creating some space for people of faith to live out their deeply held beliefs. But especially in that first category of instances, I'm talking about the pre-COVID instances, especially when it comes to whether people of faith in the public square are going to be forced to go along with the messages that the state thinks are important at the sacrifice of their own conscience. It's a really popular thing for people on the religious left and for secularists to say is that, oh, that's not real persecution. Look at what's happening. I mean, you call that persecution, and, and then they make some joke about, Starbucks having red cups, which, by the way, was never a thing, never a controversy. It was just made that way because of the great gift that Twitter is to the world. No, here's why that matters. During COVID, 3 times I did some work with a group called ICON, the International Council on Nigeria, which really is trying to point out the dreadful persecution that's happening, particularly in this case against Christians at the hands of Muslim militants, Boko Haram and the Fulani herdsmen. On that call was an NFL star named Benjamin Watson. On that, Zoom, Facebook Live was a guy named Frank Wolf, who's a longtime U.S. congressman who's been recognized for his longtime advocacy of religious persecuted groups around the world. On that call was, believe it or not, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, a Democratic congresswoman from Hawaii who was fearless in her advocacy for the Christians being persecuted in Nigeria. Here's why I bring this up. What other country is that happening in, Shane? What other country do you have the ability to pull those voices together and actually nudge, and in our case, nudge Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and others to get the president to talk about it, to appeal to him, to appoint a special counsel, a special envoy specifically for Nigeria. What other country do you have an ambassador for international religious liberty? This is a rare thing in world history. And we don't want to lose religious liberty here, not just because religious liberty is good for the world. By the way, as you see the government restrict religion, you'll also see the government restrict economic freedom, and you'll see it restrict all kinds of other freedom and therefore economic output. But it's also this, Shane, and this really, really matters. We can't advocate for our brothers and sisters who are facing a far worse situation than we are if we don't have the religious freedom to do so. And that's why it's worth preserving, because it's a good. It's a good in and of itself that should be stewarded. Religious liberty is the ability to keep religion operating separately from government, free of government interference, free of government restrictions, at least in terms of common sense restrictions, and so on. So that's why these numbers are troubling, and they should be troubling. And by the way, I don't know where the Pew Forum actually came down on who did this study. But many people are noting the increasing restriction of religion in the United States at the hands of government. We've made the World Watch List, for example, or at least we've gone the wrong direction in the World Watch List in America. I mean, we haven't but we've gone the wrong direction in a lot of these global indexes of religious and economic freedom. That's not a good thing. That's a loss. That's a net loss. And it won't just be a net loss for us. It'll be a net loss for the whole world.
That's an absolutely key point, John. One of the early things that emerged, you see with the apologists in the early years of the church, just after the New Testament, is this repeated reminder to the Roman emperors and officials that, look, Christians are your best citizens. We're the ones who take care of everybody, the sick and the poor and the destitute and the outcast and the children that you guys abandoned. We're the ones who are taking care of them. We have this saying at Breakpoint, we've been saying it for years, when it comes to religious freedom restrictions in the United States and other developed countries, we say, you're going to miss us when we're gone. And the point of that is that a large percentage of the medical work, for instance, that goes on in this country, the charity work, the ministries to the homeless, you can go on and on and on, are motivated by religion, specifically Christian religion. The two biggest religious groups of hospitals in this country, as far as I know, are Catholics and Baptists. There are a few Presbyterian hospitals here and there, but we're kind of a smaller presence. The point is that even in this country, Christians are your best citizens. We're the ones who show mercy and love to our neighbors. We're the ones who kind of fill in the gaps of a broken healthcare system. And that's true also when it comes to ministry to and recognition of the persecuted overseas. Who would be the voice exactly for those in predominantly Muslim nations who are being driven from their homes if it weren't for organizations that are based throughout the West, but a lot of them in the United States? There wouldn't be a whole lot of a voice for them. As far as I know, the World Watch List is put on by a bunch of people here in the United States because they deeply care about our brothers and sisters worldwide. And we care because religious freedom is more than just a good for us. It's more than just a special favor we're pleading for ourselves so we can live the way we want. We believe religious freedom is good for all people. Going back to the early history of the church, again, you see this push for religious freedom on the basis of the toleration, on the basis of the fact that you can't compel people. Tertullian said this. Lactantius said this. You can't compel people to believe something, especially not the gospel. That's the most fundamental set of beliefs. They have to be persuaded. They have to be brought into it. So religious freedom isn't just a special favor we're pleading. And you're absolutely right. It's good for everyone, for those of us in the United States who have religious freedom to preserve it. And by the way, when you mentioned Hong Kong, John, the reason Hong Kong has a history of religious freedom is because they trace their roots back to the Anglosphere. You know, they trace their roots back to this English tradition of religious toleration, which is what gave birth also to our own constitution, our own ideas of religious toleration. And that came out of, us Presbyterians pressing hard and trying to get you Anglicans to tolerate us in England. So you're welcome.
Well, I mean, there was an example this week just of religion being good for people, being good for the world. In other words, one of the things that's getting in the way of advancing religious liberty right now is this idea that religion is just a personal, private fantasy, that it's just, everyone's allowed their own personal delusion. Yeah, that's the word that Professor Robbie George used, which I think is really good. It's like, I like to knit, I like to love Jesus, it's like the same thing. But what we continue to see is the real tangible benefits that religion or religious association gives to people in their lives. Like, it actually makes a difference. So take, for example, the Gallup poll this week, that Americans' mental health is down. Now, that's no surprise. We've talked about that. We've talked about the deaths from despair that were pre-existing conditions to COVID, that clearly we continue to see indications that they got worse during COVID. Study this week, Shane, of student athletes. I don't know if you saw this. Student athletes, that their mental health issues up 40%, suicidal ideation up 40% among student athletes, because so many of them, it's just completely uncertain. Mike Krzyzewski, the coach of the Duke Blue Devils, kind of considered one of the great college basketball coaches of all time. And it might be because Duke's having a rough year so far, but he actually called for this kind of, constant uncertainty, players locked away in a hotel room, can't go anywhere, that they're trying to do in order to have their season is actually not good for them. It's actually causing an unnecessary amount of stress, not to mention, I was talking to a good friend of mine who has an 11-year-old son. He goes, look, and the schools that his kid went to started out kind of hybrid and then went all online. He's like, are you telling me that it's a good idea for an 11-year-old to be on a computer all day? Like, that right. 11-year-old boy, right?
Right.
So, but what we saw is that as we see the mental health situation worsen among Americans, there was an exception, right? According to Gallup, what was the exception? It was churchgoers.
Frequent churchgoers, that's key. The ones who just go for Easter and Christmas saw a significant degradation in their mental health, as rated by themselves. People who identify as Republicans saw an extremely large degradation in mental health. Democrats, registered Democrats, urban people saw slightly, less loss of mental health. But the only group, when you look at the chart, it was incredible. Everything was a minus sign. Everybody lost this past year, except for frequent churchgoers, who were up by 4%.
Yeah,
with the plus
and
sign.
It's interesting to kind of think through what that might be, right? What is it about that? Now, you and I would say maybe it's because Christianity is true, right? But what else could it be? I think that there's a number of things we could point to. First of all, how many churches where people stayed engaged? What were they doing? Almost always they were thinking about, okay, how do I help the people in our church? How do I help the people in the community? In other words, there's something about church going that at a time when everyone was trying to think about, how do I protect my own health? How do I protect my own lifestyle? How do I protect my own income? How do I protect that? This is the one thing that turned people outward. This is the one thing that turned people to serving others. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about first responders. That's what they did, and they did it well. And the fact, by the way, that they weren't Time Magazine's People of the Year is an absolute highway robbery. I can't believe they did that after.
Oh,
anyway.
I didn't see that. Who was it? Like Greta Thunberg or something?
Oh, no. It was Joe Biden and Kamala Harris together.
Oh, wow. That's great.
For winning the election. No one knows what else they're going to do. I don't know how it's. Well,
it's like Barack Obama's Nobel Peace Prize. No one's quite sure what the reasoning behind that was, but we still got it.
Oh man, are we gonna? We were just getting around politics, and here we are, right back where our feet. It's like our feet are stuck in the quicksand and we can't get out. It would be interesting for this Gallup poll to dig a little deeper, right? Because this whole idea that I just had an aneurysm the first time I saw this phrase that church was non-essential, or that some workers were non-essential. I'm just like, to who? To their family. That work is not non-essential. To their family, that work is driving an Uber is essential to a family that needs to drive an Uber in order to whatever, right? I mean, that sort of language just reflects something, and that's why when you see this statistic, I hope that we are able to, in the days after this, dig a little deeper and figure out, what is it about religion? What is it about church going? I know, for example, Arthur Brooks years ago did something on happiness, and he talked about how going to church makes you happy. We know, for example, going to church makes you more generous, right? Some of the poorest states in America are some of the most generous because it has the highest church attendance rates. There's something about this that we will miss if the government clamps down on it. We will miss if it becomes less and less. And by the way, I don't think the real threat in America is that the government clamps down on it as much as it is people give up on it, and because it's not essential in their own minds. So anyway, it'd be interesting to watch when some of these details. It's almost like we've gone through 2020 as a year of a crucible, and there's going to be a whole lot of things that have risen to the top and lessons that we can learn. I hope we do.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, folks. We'll be right back after this to talk about more of the stories of the week from a Christian worldview perspective. Stay with us. John, for our recommendations this week, I want to drop in a plug for a book whose author
No,
I just
I'm not going to let you do it. I'm not going to let you do a book this week.
It's been
no.
weeks
You've done
since
a book.
I did a book. Come on.
That is not true. You did a book
what was the
like
book I did last
yesterday.
week?
I don't know. Maybe I did a book, and maybe that's the problem.
I think
now,
I've been doing, like,
here's our rule
movies
this
and
week, because we're
music
going
and
into
stuff.
Christmas week. We need to help people. So these recommendations this week, all right?
Okay. All right.
It's got to be a Christmas movie.
Got to be a Christmas movie. Okay.
You got to recommend a Christmas movie. That's the rule this week.
I was going to recommend a sociology book by Mark Regnerus called The Future of Christian Marriage, which is excellent.
Save it for 2021. It'll still be there.
It'll
probably be on sale.
Check it out. Yeah, it'll be great. If you want to check it out, go
is
to
this
my
your
podcast
non-recommendation recommendation that you're doing right now?
This is my 100% recommendation, but you've shut me down, John. So I would recommend a movie in a second, but
It's
just say,
Christmas. Take a load off. Take a vacation.
check out the Upstream podcast, and you can hear my interview with Mark this coming week, and we talk about his book. So for my Christmas recommendation, since you're such a hound for this, I'll go ahead and say a really cliche one, and I hope you watch this every year. And everyone says it's the best darn Christmas movie out there because it's the best darn Christmas movie out there, and it is, of course, It's a Wonderful Life. And the reason I'm going to
I have a break point coming on that this week.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
The reason I want to mention this is because we rewatched it early this past week, and my kids were watching it. And my first reaction was, what is this heresy? Because it was the colorized version. So it was like, what is this, Munchkin Land? Everything's colored. It's a Wonderful Life is black and white. You can't do this. But once I got past that and just re-recognized the genius of the movie, I was just so moved by it. I can't sit in front of that movie and watch it and not just be moved to tears. And the reason just gets more poignant every single year for me as I grow as a husband and as a father and as an employee and as a church member, because this character, George Bailey, he's got Jimmy Stewart's character. He's got all these aspirations. It's like this. It's like a summary in brief of what it means to be a man, of your desperate desire to go out and change the world and conquer the world and subdue creation, and he wants to make a name for himself. And he gives all this up for something that we have forgotten in our time, and that is the rootedness that you and I were talking about earlier, when it comes to coming together for Christmas and not hating everybody and saying things that you're going to regret, because he realizes his greatest treasures are right there in the place where he grew up, with the people that he's always known and loved and interacted with, and begun to take for granted in his desire to find something else. And then when things get hard, he doesn't see the role that he's played in all of their lives. And the fact that it takes place at Christmas, I used to think that was kind of incidental. I didn't get it. But it came over me like a thunderclap this last time, John, was that Christmas is the most particular thing you can imagine. It is scandalously particular, because the God of the universe, who's sort of apprehended and speculated about by the philosophers, comes down to a particular time and place, to a particular village, to a particular young woman, to take a particular identity with a particular people, and live this life. Where he doesn't travel more than a couple of 100 miles from the place of his birth. He doesn't meet as many people as I probably have Facebook friends, and yet he changes the entire course of history. Because obviously because he's God, but first and foremost because I think that is how God designed human beings to be. Jesus is not just God, as much as you could say just God. He is the greatest of all men. He is the archetype of what a man is supposed to be, and he comes into history and he lives the life of the good life of a man as he should live it, and it changes everything. And not just because he's got the divinity within him there that the disciples only see during the transfiguration and so forth. So it's a wonderful life because with so many reasons that I could go on and on and on, but just watch it and think about those kind of things. Think about the particularity. Think about the idea of a life mattering deeply in ways that our culture doesn't typically think matters. The glamour and the fame and the headlines and his brother going off to war and winning all these medals and stuff. And then just try to look at your life in the same way. And you'll realize that you have that same particularity. You have that same power to influence the world through small things and time and place and people, like Christ did, like George Bailey did. So that's my recommendation.
Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit because you took my movie, which is a break point. But it's a good one. I mean, I think the rootedness is powerful. A couple weeks ago, you mentioned A Christmas Carol. I really liked a good friend of mine, Ted Boyd, a guy that I used to work with, made a recommendation on Facebook this week that I thought was great, which is watch as many of the different versions of A Christmas Carol as you can. And he watches them all and then is kind of like a connoisseur of them and compares them, because it is fascinating to watch what details are in and what details aren't. And I think that's a lot of fun to do. My wife and I going to kick into the new. There's a new kind of mini series that's a little bit edgier. It's a little bit of a darker turn on Marley and so on. I'll let you know about that one. I might end up hating it when it's all said and done. I have to say one thing about A Christmas Carol. I have to say one thing about the Jacob Marley thing. There was an article, or not an article. It was a blog post I did a few years ago. I want to see if you've heard anyone else say this. There's something I noticed. I had just read the parable of the rich man and Lazarus before I watched A Christmas Carol. And I realized it is as if Dickens said to himself, well, Jesus said that they wouldn't believe even if a man came back from the dead and told them to repent of their ways and turn around. The brothers of the rich man, who he says, I have all these brothers and I'm in hell here. I want you to go and send Lazarus to warn them. And Abraham says, well, even if a dead man came back and warned them, they wouldn't believe because they had the law and the prophets. Let them believe them. And it's almost as if Dickens said, but what if a man did come back and warn his brother, so to speak, warn his partner? And that is what Jacob Marley does in the text. He comes back and, he scares the bejeebles out of Scrooge. And then he says, Scrooge's like, why are you here? And Marley says, I'm here to give you a chance and a hope of my own procuring. But maybe Dickens took Jesus all the way at his word, because had Scrooge just heard from Marley and not gotten, wait for it, additional special revelation, right. Maybe he wouldn't have believed. No, it's fascinating. So here's the generic recommendation. which is, and by the way, I got to tell this funny story. We're off on all kinds of tangents, but hey, it's Christmas.
It's Christmas.
I was on Moody Radio Network, across the network, drive time, about 15 years ago, and to talk about how to take advantage of the Christmas season and holidays, and how do you watch movies with your kids and do it actively instead of passively. And I guess I should have anticipated this question, but I've been teaching all day and I was really kind of mentally not quite all there. And the host asked me my favorite Christmas movie, and I went blank, literally just went completely blank. And I could not think of A Christmas Carol or It's a Wonderful Life, which are the two obvious answers to that question, no matter who you are. And I had just watched with my family Elf the night before. That was the only one I could think of. So across Moody Radio Network, I said Elf. But I will say this:
you sit on a throne of lies.
You sit on it. Yeah, you smell like beef and cheese. By the way, I am proud that my daughters find opportune times to drop those quotes. We were when my middle daughter was like 6. We were in an elevator going up to our hotel room, and there was a couple. It must have been a football team or something staying there because we weren't there, and a bunch of the buttons were pushed. And she went, "Ooh, looks like a Christmas tree," and they lost it. They thought it was great. Anyway. I would say, though, my recommendation is watch Christmas movies this week. What a great resource we have. And notice, too, that all the ones that are worth their salt, all the ones that are, and that includes from, the Muppets Christmas Carol or Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol or Christmas Carol or It's a Wonderful Life or even Elf at some level. There's always a change of life. Now, I know that happens in a lot of movies, but there's not a Christmas movie worth our time where our life doesn't change. Yeah. It's always a change of life, isn't it? And what a great way to talk about what changes our life and how does our life change, and why does our life change? What a great time to talk with our kids. But since you took my movie recommendation, and I'm going to recommend Christmas movies in general, and to talk about heart change, I will make a recommendation for families to do together. It's part of our family tradition. We love this. It is something to listen to together, and it's Michael Card's The Promise CD, which is a wonderful journey through Christmas from creation to new creation, and special kind of insight, I think, on Mary and Joseph and the shepherds and the Magi and Herod and the spiritual battle going on behind the scenes. Just a wonderful thing. In our Advent reading this week, I was reminded of The Promise again because Michael Card, the artist, pulls this out in The Promise. But in our Advent reading, we were reading through that portion of Revelation where it talks about the birth of Christ and how the dragon is just waiting there to devour the seed of the woman. And you just think, man, the all-out cosmic battle that this was. The birth of Christ is just, if we knew what a movie that could make, what a story that makes. I was reminded of that again this week too with the wonderful Christmas hymn, This Little Babe, which was the words predate a couple hundred years, but the 20th century British composer Benjamin Britten put this together.
Wasn't he the guy that got older as he aged, or younger as he aged?
That's Benjamin Button. That's a little bit different.
Okay. All right.
Benjamin Britten. By the way, not a believer. That's what's so interesting is that he was Christ haunted. You could tell, but takes this hymn or these words from a poem, This Little Babe, and it sounds like Away in a Manger. Really sweet and cuddly and all that sort of stuff. And here's the first line. By the way, I owe this, knowing about this, to Tia Moore. This little babe, so few days old, has come to rifle Satan's fold. I mean, you can just see this little baby just kind of like getting down to work, just like tearing the ramparts apart. It's just that's what's going on behind the scenes at Christmas. The meekness, the mildness, the quiet, the cuteness, the baby. There's an all-out war for the soul of mankind and the history of the world that's behind this. So I really like how Michael Card puts a lot of that together in The Promise. It's one of my annual recommendations on Breakpoint. And so also this coming week on Breakpoint, I'm going to talk about Handel's Messiah. I'm going to talk about Britain. this little babe. This It's a Wonderful Life that's coming as well. So a lot coming up this coming week. Hopefully that can help you have good conversations with your kids about what the season is all about.
Great recommendations, John. And that's it for today. But if you head on over to Breakpoint, you can check out all of the links to the stories that we've talked about on today's program, and we'll post links to a couple of these recommendations as well, so that you can enjoy them with your family. For John Stonestreet and for the Colson Center, I'm Shane Morris. Happy Christmas.